A hood drops over your face, and the corridor disappears, replaced by the sound of your own breath and boots on stone. You are guided into a cell built to fit one man, one Bible, and one idea: that silence will save you. But at Pentonville Prison in London, opened in 1842, the silence was not mercy. Men spent 23 hours a day alone, forbidden to speak, marched in masks, and boxed into chapel stalls like upright coffins until minds began to buckle. Reports tracked surging insanity, delusions, and suicides, and Victorian reformers called it progress, then copied the plan across Britain: a perfect cage sold as hope. London wanted a modern punishment, and Pentonville promised science, salvation, and control without the blood of the gallows. The year is 1842. Britain is arguing about crime the way it argues about everything, with moral certainty and no consensus. Public hangings still draw crowds, but the spectacle makes reformers uneasy. Transportation to Australia is expensive and distant. The old prisons are filthy chaos, where men sleep 10 to a room and leave more criminal than they entered. Someone needs a solution that looks like progress, sounds like Christianity, and costs less than a ship to the other side of the world. Captain Joshua Jebb gives them a building. He is a royal engineer with a taste for order and a belief that architecture can correct the soul. He has studied the Philadelphia model, where American Quakers locked men in total isolation and called it mercy. The logic gleams with simplicity. Crime is a disease of association. Men learn wickedness from other men, separate them, force them into silence with only their conscience and a Bible, and God will do the rest. Punishment becomes a kind of surgery. You cut away the infection by cutting away human contact. Pentonville rises on a former dust heap in North London. It announces itself before you reach the gate. The main entrance is a fortress dressed as a palace, with classical columns and heavy stone that borrows authority from ancient Rome. Walk through that gate and you enter the hub, a central observation point where 5 long wings radiate outward like spokes on a wheel. Each wing is 4 stories high, lined with narrow galleries that run the length of iron railings. The cells open onto these galleries, all identical, all visible from below. The building wants you to see how completely it sees you. Every sight line has been calculated, every measurement justified. The radiating design means a single guard at the center can monitor hundreds of men with a glance. The wings stretch long and straight, no hidden corners, no blind alcoves where conspiracy might grow. This is architecture as moral philosophy. The prison does not punish through pain. It punishes through geometry. The men inside will not see each other. They will not speak to each other. They will exist as units in identical boxes, each one alone with the weight of his own thoughts. The reformers call this the separate system. They believe it is humane. They believe the soul, like a wound, heals best when nothing touches it. The question is simple. What does it mean when morality is poured into brick? The architecture that forbade being human. Every measurement was a moral lesson: cell length, light angle, an air vent, even the door hole that let a voice become contraband. The cell is 13 feet long, 7 feet wide, 9 feet high. This is not arbitrary. Reformers calculated the minimum space a man needs to kneel in prayer, sleep on a plank, and work at a simple task without luxury or despair. The walls are brick, painted white to reflect the light from a single high window. The window is barred and angled so you cannot see another prisoner, only a wedge of sky. There is a wooden bed that folds against the wall, a small table, a stool, a Bible, a hammock for sleeping, a basin, a waste bucket with a lid. You are given enough air to breathe and enough space to repent, nothing more. The door is solid wood with a small inspection flap at eye level. A guard can look in, but you cannot look out. Sound travels strangely in the galleries. Footsteps echo and multiply. Voices become hard to place. The prison enforces silence, not just through rules, but through design. Speak, and your voice becomes evidence. The architecture is listening. When prisoners move, they wear hoods, not as punishment, but as policy. The separate system insists that even accidental recognition is contamination. So men walk the exercise yard in masks, shuffling single file in a circle, unable to see faces, unable to speak, their identities dissolved into brown cloth and boot leather. They are bodies in motion, stripped of everything that makes them particular. The chapel is the strangest room. It looks normal from the pulpit, rows of wooden stalls facing forward like any church. But each stall is a box. The sides are high enough to block your neighbor from view. You sit alone in your compartment, eyes staring at the back of another box, while the chaplain speaks about mercy. The prisoners call these stalls coffins. They are not wrong. You are upright and breathing, but you have been buried in company. The building demands this. It was designed to forbid connection, to turn human presence into a series of separated events. You eat alone, you work alone, you pray alone. The other men are nearby, breathing the same air, but they might as well be ghosts. The prison has made you a ghost to them. Staff obsess over silence like it is a sacrament. Guards patrol the galleries, listening for whispers. Men are punished for talking through doors, for tapping codes on pipes, for humming. The prison wants absolute quiet, because in that quiet, the soul is supposed to hear God. But silence has other effects. The first cracks appear not in the walls, but in the prisoners. Men start whispering to themselves. They pace their cells in loops. They speak to their shadows. The mind, deprived of conversation, begins to invent companions. Prisoners tap on walls in rhythm, creating dialogue from percussion. They learn to project their voices through ventilation shafts, turning the building's own design against its purpose. The architecture forbids humanity, so humanity finds new channels. The pipes carry more than water. They carry voices, thin and distorted, but alive. The new religion of isolation wins. Before the first scandal, Pentonville becomes a showroom, toured by officials who leave convinced they have seen the future. The prison opens to applause. Reformers arrive from across Europe to study the galleries, the cells, the chapel stalls. They take notes. They ask questions about ventilation rates and work schedules. They watch prisoners move in their hoods, silent and orderly, and they see proof that discipline can be humane. No whips, no chains, no visible cruelty. Just clean cells and the promise that solitude will make men whole. Reports glow. The system works, they say. Men are learning trades in their cells, shoemaking, tailoring, mat weaving. They are reading scripture. They are reflecting on their crimes. The separate system is not punishment, the reformers insist. It is reformation. It is medicine. The prison becomes a model in the most literal sense. Other institutions want to copy it. The architects are invited to design similar prisons across Britain. The government sees efficiency. One model, endlessly repeatable. Build 5 wings radiating from a hub. Install the cells. Entrain the staff, and you have a factory of moral improvement. The cost is high, but the promise is higher. Pentonville becomes a brand. Separate system prisons begin appearing in other cities. Variations on the same theme: isolation, silence, surveillance through architecture. Officials tour the exercise yard and marvel at the choreography. Prisoners walk in circles, masked and mute, like figures in a mechanical clock. There is beauty in the order, if you believe order is the same as progress. The chaplains report success. They say men weep during sermons, overcome by remorse. They say the Bible is being read with new urgency. They say souls are being saved. But the building is making other calculations. It counts days in lockdown, hours without speech, the gradual erosion of personality into routine. It does not report these numbers yet. The confidence is too great, the momentum too strong. Britain is building the future, one silent cell at a time. By the late 1840s, the replication is no longer a plan. It is a movement. Prisons modeled on Pentonville appear in Liverpool, in Manchester, in Glasgow. The design spreads to Ireland, to the colonies, wherever the British want to project control and call it reform. The separate system becomes doctrine. Isolation becomes standard practice. The reformers believe they are witnessing a revolution. They believe the building has won, and in a sense, it has. Pentonville proves that you can turn punishment into architecture, that you can build morality into brick and iron, and that the state will adopt it as policy. The system does not need to be kind. It only needs to look like progress. Act 1 ends with triumph, but Britain commits to building dozens more. Silence starts, eating the prisoners. The first thing that breaks is time, because when nothing happens, your mind starts inventing events to survive. The routine is fixed. You wake in darkness. A bell rings. You stand for inspection. A guard passes bread and water through the door slot. You eat. You work at your bench, stitching or weaving or picking oakum until your fingers bleed. You walk in a circle, hooded, for 1 hour. You return to your cell. You eat again. You sleep. The day repeats. The week repeats. The months dissolve into each other. There are no mirrors. You forget what your face looks like. There are no clocks in the cells. You lose the ability to judge time by anything except bells and the movement of light through your high window. Some men count breaths. Some men count footsteps in the gallery. Some men stop counting and let time become a single continuous present, stretched thin and unbroken. The mind needs stimulation. It needs variety, conflict, surprise. Deprive it, and it begins to generate its own. Men start seeing things that are not there. Shadows take shape. The walls seem to shift. Voices call from the ventilation shafts. Not other prisoners, but something stranger, something that knows your name. The building is vast and full of men, but you are alone in a way that feels absolute. Some men talk to themselves. It starts as muttering, then becomes conversation. They develop characters. A wife, a brother, a friend from childhood. The conversations are detailed. They argue. They laugh. The guards hear this and mark it in their reports. They call it delusion. They do not call it what it is, the mind's desperate attempt to stay social in a place designed to kill sociability. At night, the prison sounds different. The galleries amplify every noise. A cough becomes a chorus. Footsteps multiply. You hear doors opening and closing, but you cannot tell if they are near or far, real or imagined. Sleep becomes difficult. The body forgets how to rest in silence. Some men lie awake for hours, listening to their own heartbeat, convinced something is wrong, but unable to name it. The system holds 520 prisoners at capacity. Each man is locked down for 23 hours a day. The cells measure 13 feet by 7 feet by 9 feet high. In the first 5 years of operation, the prison reports a sharp increase in cases of insanity and mental disturbance. Men develop delusions of persecution. They believe the walls are closing in. They believe other prisoners are plotting against them, even though they have never spoken to another prisoner. Some men begin hearing voices that command them to harm themselves. Suicides are recorded. The numbers are buried in official reports, but the pattern is clear. Isolation at this intensity is doing something terrible to the human mind. The separate system promised reform. It delivered sensory deprivation, temporal disorientation, and the slow collapse of identity. The body adapts to the cell. The mind does not. Work is supposed to keep men occupied, but the tasks are repetitive and meaningless. You make the same stitch 1,000 times. You pull apart rope fibers until your hands are raw. There is no conversation, no collaboration, and no sense that your labor contributes to anything beyond filling the hours. The work becomes mechanical. You become mechanical. Your body is the only thing you can still control. Some men exercise obsessively, pacing their cells in patterns. Some men stop moving entirely, lying on their beds and staring at the ceiling for days. The guards call this laziness. The doctors call it melancholy. No one calls it what the building is doing, erasing personhood through enforced nothingness. The question is not whether the system harms. The question is how fast. And the answer is faster than anyone predicted, when insanity became a data point. Pentonville did not hide the damage at first. It counted it, filed it, and argued about what the numbers meant. The medical officers keep ledgers. They record symptoms, hallucinations, mania, profound depression, refusal to eat, refusal to speak even when permitted. They note the progression. A man enters the prison healthy. After 3 months of separation, he begins talking to the walls. After 6 months, he stops responding to questions. After a year, he no longer recognizes his own name. The doctors write this down with the clinical precision of men studying a disease. But what is the disease? That is where the argument begins. Some physicians blame the separate system directly. They point to the correlation between isolation and mental breakdown. They publish papers arguing that prolonged solitude is fundamentally incompatible with human sanity. They cite Pentonville's own numbers. In a population of 500, the rate of insanity is 2 to 3 times higher than in older prisons where men are housed together. They say the evidence is irrefutable. Others disagree. They argue that the prisoners were already weak-minded, that crime itself is evidence of moral and mental defect, and that separation merely reveals what was always there. They reframe breakdown as diagnosis, not cause. The prison is not creating insanity, they say. It is sorting the insane from the merely criminal. This logic is convenient. It protects the system by pathologizing the prisoner. The debate plays out in medical journals, in parliamentary inquiries, in private letters between reformers who are beginning to suspect they have built something monstrous but cannot admit it publicly. The numbers keep climbing. More delusions, more suicides, more men transferred to asylums because Pentonville can no longer manage their deterioration. The administrators respond by doubling down. They tighten the rules. They argue that laxity causes problems, not rigor. If men are breaking, it is because the silence is not total enough, the separation not pure enough. They increase patrols. They punish communication more harshly. They insist that the system works and that any failure is a failure of implementation, not design. Reports to Parliament are carefully worded. They acknowledge elevated rates of mental disturbance, but frame it as an acceptable cost. They compare it to surgical risk. Some patients die on the table, but that does not invalidate the operation. The prison is performing moral surgery, and complications are inevitable. But the complications are not medical accidents. They are predictable outcomes. The human mind is social by nature. It needs exchange, variation, recognition. Remove those things for long enough, and the mind begins to eat itself. Pentonville has created an experiment in deprivation, and the results are catastrophic. The chaplains offer a different kind of evidence. They say men are more devout in separation. They say prayers are more sincere when spoken in solitude. They say the tears they witness during chapel services prove the system is reaching the soul. They do not mention that those same men are weeping in their cells at night, or that devotion and desperation can look identical from the outside. Suffering becomes evidence for both sides. The reformers see broken men and call it proof that evil is being purged. The critics see broken men and call it proof that the system is torture. No one asks the prisoners what they think, because the system has made their voices contraband. The moral twist is this: the more men crack, the more data the prison generates. And the more data it generates, the more it can justify itself by pointing to the rigor of its record-keeping. Pentonville becomes a factory of suffering and a factory of statistics, and both products are exported as progress. The moment reformers refused to see. The more men cracked, the more the system doubled down, because relaxing the rules would admit the prison itself was wrong. There is a moment in every failed system when the architects realize their mistake, but choose not to correct it. For Pentonville, that moment arrives in the early 1850s. The evidence is overwhelming. The medical reports are damning. Other institutions are quietly abandoning the strictest forms of separation. But Pentonville does not change. It cannot change, because change would be confession. The staff routines tighten. Guards are instructed to be even more vigilant about silence. The prison develops elaborate systems for preventing communication, staggered movement schedules, acoustic baffles in the galleries, punishments for any breach of the separation rules. The logic becomes circular. If the system is not working, it must be because the system is not being followed precisely enough. Outside criticism grows louder. Physicians publish studies linking prolonged isolation to permanent mental damage. Reformers who once championed Pentonville begin to distance themselves. Some prisons experiment with limited association, letting men work together in silence or eat in groups. These modifications are never called reforms. They are called adjustments. No one wants to say the original design was wrong. Pentonville resists adjustment. It digs in. The administration insists that separation remains the purest form of reform, that any compromise weakens the moral force of the system. They frame relaxation as weakness, as a surrender to the prisoner's baser instincts. They say that silence saves, and that any suffering is the price of salvation. But the building knows better. It feels the strain in every corridor. The staff turnover increases. Guards quit after seeing too many men descend into madness. Chaplains struggle to reconcile their faith with the despair they witness. Medical officers request transfers. The prison becomes hard to work in, not because of violence, but because of the slow and grinding awareness that the harm being done is systematic and intentional. The point of no return is not a single event. It is the accumulation of decisions not to change. Every time an inquiry suggests reform, the administration finds reasons to delay. Every time a doctor reports damage, the response is to study the prisoner, not the prison. Every time evidence mounts, the system becomes more defensive, more rigid, more convinced that the solution is not less separation, but more. Other prisons drift toward leniency without announcing it. They reduce lockdown hours. They allow prisoners to see each other during work. They abandon the chapel coffins for open seating. These changes are implemented quietly, without fanfare, because to announce them would be to admit that Pentonville's original purity was cruelty. Pentonville watches this happen and holds firm. It becomes the last defender of a dying orthodoxy. The separate system loses its moral certainty everywhere, except in the prison that perfected it. The building remains what it was always meant to be, a machine for isolation, and machines do not doubt themselves. Act 2 ends with maximum tension. The model prison has lost its claim to reform, but it keeps its walls. The architecture survives the argument, copying a machine that harms. The tragedy multiplies when you realize Pentonville was not a mistake. It was a template shipped outward. The replication happens fast. Before the damage is fully understood, before the studies are complete, before anyone admits that the separate system might be fundamentally flawed, Britain exports the design. Prisons rise in city after city, i.e., each one a variation on Pentonville's radiating wings, each one committed to the same principle, that isolation heals. Officials love it for practical reasons. The design is legible. You can train staff using the same manual. You can predict costs. You can build one version, then copy it 20 times with minimal adaptation. The separate system offers something rare in government: scalability. And scalability in the mid-1800s looks like efficiency. The numbers are stark. Between 1842 and 1870, over 50 prisons in Britain alone adopt the Pentonville model or close variations. The costs run into hundreds of thousands of pounds: stone, iron, labor, land acquisition. The buildings are expensive, but they promise long-term savings by reducing the need for transportation and by creating a predictable, controllable environment. The investment is justified as modern, scientific, humane. Some prisons are literal copies: 5 wings, central hub, identical cells, chapel stalls. Others adapt the principles: fewer wings, different dimensions, but the same commitment to separation. The model spreads to Ireland, where Mountjoy Prison opens in 1850 as Pentonville's Irish twin. It spreads to the colonies, Australia, India, territories where the British want to impose order on populations they consider unruly. The separate system becomes a tool of empire. Speed matters. Within a decade of Pentonville's opening, the separate system is embedded in the infrastructure of British justice. Architectural plans are distributed like blueprints for a factory. The design is not questioned. It is assumed to be correct because it is systematic, because it is expensive, because it was built by experts. The building becomes its own argument. The tragedy is this: every new prison built on the Pentonville model inherits the same flaw. Isolation at this intensity damages the mind. That fact does not change because the buildings multiply, but the multiplication makes the flaw harder to acknowledge, because admitting it would mean admitting that the state has spent a fortune building instruments of harm, so the harm is scaled. Men in Liverpool go mad in cells identical to those in London. Men in Dublin lose their minds in the same measured silence. The separate system creates a uniform experience of suffering, efficient and repeatable, spreading across the country like a chain of identical machines, each one turning isolation into insanity with the precision of industrial production. The public swallows the story. Prisons are supposed to be harsh. That is their nature. If men suffer, it is because they deserve to suffer. If they go mad, it is because they were weak to begin with. The architecture is never blamed. The design is never questioned. The building stands as proof of its own legitimacy. When harm is scalable, who is responsible? The architect who drew the plans, the government that funded construction, the staff who enforced the rules, the reformers who championed the system. The answer is everyone and no one. The responsibility is diffused across so many institutions and individuals that it becomes impossible to locate. The harm is systematic, which means it is also anonymous. Pentonville does not stand alone. It stands at the head of a family of identical siblings, each one repeating the original sin. The model prison is not a singular failure. It is a mass-produced failure, exported as progress and embedded in the architecture of an empire. And the worst part is this: the buildings do not die. They adapt. They outlive the arguments that created them. The separate system may fall out of favor, but the prisons remain, their Victorian bones still shaping how bodies are held, how time is measured, how punishment is performed. The question is not whether the model was wrong. The question is how long it takes for architecture to admit its mistakes. The building changes. The idea survives. Pentonville adds cells, shifts infrastructure, and patches failures. Yet the underlying geometry keeps insisting on separation. The prison does not stay static. It cannot. Demand grows. Crime increases. The courts send more men, and Pentonville must hold them. So the building expands. Wings are modified. New cells are built into existing spaces. Capacity stretches beyond what the original architects intended. By the late 1800s, Pentonville holds over 800 prisoners. The cells remain the same size, but they are packed more densely. Some men are doubled up, two bodies in a space designed for solitary reflection. The separate system erodes not through policy change, but through pressure. The prison still wants isolation, but it can no longer afford it. Infrastructure changes reveal the prison's struggle. Heating systems are upgraded. Plumbing is modernized. Electric lighting replaces gas. These are not aesthetic choices. They are concessions to the building's age and the strain of holding more men than it was designed to contain. The prison patches itself decade after decade, adding layers of infrastructure like scar tissue over an old wound. But the geometry does not change. The radiating wings remain. The galleries remain. The central hub remains. Pentonville still looks like what it was in 1842, a machine for separation. The cells may be used differently, the rules may be relaxed, but the architecture insists on its original logic. You cannot walk through Pentonville without feeling the weight of that insistence. The chapel stalls are eventually removed. The hoods are abandoned. The strict silence rules fade into policy history. But the building remembers. Every corridor is too long. Every gallery is too narrow. Every cell is too small. The prison was designed for one purpose, and that purpose is written into its bones. Expansion continues into the 20th century. Additional wings, modified layouts, spaces repurposed from workshops into cells. The prison grows in ways that strain the original symmetry. It becomes a hybrid, Victorian order overlaid with modern pragmatism, neither fully committed to separation nor fully free from it. The added cells do not follow the original proportions. They are smaller, cruder, more utilitarian. Pentonville loses its showroom polish. It becomes a working prison, battered by use, crowded beyond intention, but still operating on principles laid down in the 1840s. The building evolves, but it never apologizes. The metaphor is clear. You can alter a building's infrastructure, expand its walls, modernize its systems, but you cannot escape the logic of its original design. Pentonville was built to separate, and separation is what it does best. Even when crowded, even when policy shifts toward association, the architecture pulls men apart. The cells are still isolated. The galleries still echo. The building still makes you feel alone in company. This is the prison's survival strategy. It adapts just enough to remain useful. It compromises just enough to avoid demolition. It changes its skin but keeps its skeleton. And the skeleton is Victorian, rigid, hierarchical, convinced that control requires distance. Staff still patrol the galleries. Guards still look into cells through inspection flaps. Prisoners still move through corridors designed to prevent congregation. The building has not abandoned its mission. It has simply learned to disguise it under layers of policy and pragmatism. The dread is this. The building evolves, but it never apologizes. It never admits that its original design was harmful. It simply continues, generation after generation, holding men in spaces built for another century's ethics, enforcing separation through geometry, even when policy has moved on. And Britain does not tear it down. It cannot. The cost is too high. The location is too useful. So, Pentonville endures, a Victorian relic still doing Victorian work, its walls holding men in configurations that should have been abandoned 100 years ago. Haunted by design, not spirits. People say Pentonville is London's most haunted building, but the most reliable ghost is repetition. The stories accumulate. Guards hear footsteps in empty corridors. Chaplains feel presences in the chapel. Prisoners report voices calling their names from cells that are unoccupied. Shadows move in the galleries when no one is there. Doors open and close without hands. Cold spots appear in specific locations. The segregation wing, the old exercise yard, the chapel where the coffin stalls once stood. The paranormal claims are persistent enough to earn Pentonville a reputation. Urban explorers, ghost hunters, and documentary crews seek access. They bring equipment, electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, audio recorders. They capture anomalies, unexplained sounds, temperature drops, orbs of light in photographs. They leave convinced the prison is haunted, but there are grounded explanations. The building is old and massive. Stone and iron conduct temperature unevenly, creating cold zones that feel uncanny but are entirely physical. The galleries are long echo chambers. Sound bounces in unexpected ways. A voice from one wing can travel through ventilation shafts and emerge in another, distorted and sourceless. Sensory deprivation creates its own hauntings. Spend enough time in isolation, and the mind begins to populate the silence with phantoms. This is not supernatural. It is neurological. The brain expects stimulus. Denied it, the brain generates stimulus internally. Prisoners in Pentonville have been reporting hallucinations since 1842. The building does not need ghosts. It makes them. Then there is suggestion. Walk into a space you are told is haunted, and your perception shifts. Every creak becomes footsteps. Every draft becomes breath. The prison's reputation primes visitors to interpret ambiguity as evidence. This is not deception. It is how human psychology works. We find patterns, even in randomness. But the most convincing explanation is repetition. Pentonville has held men in the same cells, walked them through the same corridors, locked them in the same segregation wings for over 180 years. The routine creates layers of experience: fear, despair, rage, resignation. These emotions do not linger as ghosts. They linger as atmosphere. The building remembers not through spirits, but through association. Specific spaces carry specific weight. The chapel, where men sat in coffin stalls, feels oppressive because it was designed to isolate even in worship. The segregation wing, where the most disturbed prisoners were held, feels wrong because suffering happened there at intensity. The exercise yard, where men walked in masks, feels lonely because loneliness was enforced there by policy. Nighttime acoustics amplify the effect. Pentonville is never silent. Metal expands and contracts with temperature. Plumbing gurgles, ventilation hums. These sounds are constant but irregular. They create an auditory texture that the mind tries to parse into meaning. At night, when visual information is limited, the ear becomes dominant, and the ear hears whispers, footsteps, breathing. Guards who work night shifts report the strongest paranormal experiences. But night shifts are also when isolation is most acute, when the absence of activity makes every sound prominent, when fatigue and monotony make the mind vulnerable to misinterpretation. The guards are not lying. They are experiencing the building as it was designed, a space that makes you hyper-aware of your own presence by denying you the presence of others. Some believe the prison is haunted because it holds the residue of trauma. This is a poetic explanation, but it is not wrong. Trauma does leave marks, not as ectoplasm, but as cultural memory, as story, as the way a place feels when you know what happened there. Pentonville feels haunted because it is haunted by its own history. The verdict remains open. You can believe in ghosts, or you can believe in acoustics and psychology. But either way, the building is doing what it has always done, making people feel watched, isolated, and unsettled. That is not paranormal. That is architectural. The true haunting is that the prison still operates. Victorian bones are still doing Victorian work. Men are still held in cells designed for another century. And the building continues, indifferent to debate, so convinced by its own endurance that it is right. A Victorian prison in modern London. Walk past the gate today and you are not entering a museum. You are entering an argument that never ended. Pentonville is still open. It holds around 1,300 prisoners in a structure built for 520. The original wings are intact. The radiating design remains. You can stand in the central hub and see the same sightlines Captain Jebb designed in 1841. The architecture has not changed. The population has tripled. The cells are still small. Many prisoners are doubled up. 2 men in a space meant for 1. The beds are stacked. The toilet is exposed. Privacy is not possible. The Victorian cells were designed for solitary reflection. Now they hold conversations, conflicts, and the accumulated tension of men forced into proximity without relief. Inspections describe conditions that range from adequate to dire. Ventilation is poor. Heating is inconsistent. Some cells have crumbling plaster and broken fixtures. The building is old and expensive to maintain. Repairs happen slowly. The prison functions, but it functions under strain. The modern city presses against the walls. Pentonville sits in Islington, surrounded by restaurants and apartments and boutique shops. From the outside, it looks like a historical monument. From the inside, it is a working institution struggling with the weight of its own past. The prison cannot expand outward. It can only compress inward, packing more men into the same Victorian geometry. Current capacity is officially 1,300, but the number fluctuates. Overcrowding is chronic. Men wait weeks for cell assignments. Some are held in holding areas longer than policy allows. The prison is under constant pressure to absorb more bodies than its infrastructure can handle. Staff are stretched. Guards manage wings designed for visibility but overwhelmed by population. The central hub, once a point of total surveillance, can no longer see everything. The architecture promised control, but control requires ratios. Enough staff for the number of men, enough space for the level of activity. Pentonville has neither. Inspections note violence, drug use, and mental health crises at rates higher than comparable facilities. The reports are careful to separate cause from correlation, but the pattern is clear. Holding men in spaces this old, this crowded, this poorly maintained, creates tension. The building does not cause the violence, but it does not prevent it either. It simply contains it, the way it has always contained things. Basic decency is under strain. Hot water is intermittent. Showers are limited. Meals are functional but monotonous. Recreation time is restricted by space and scheduling. Men spend more hours locked in their cells than policy recommends. The separate system may be officially dead, but its architecture enforces a kind of separation by accident. Crowding isolates as effectively as policy once did. The question is simple. What does it mean to keep using a building built for another century's ethics? Is it pragmatism? Is it inertia? Is it an admission that we still do not know what else to do with men who break the law? Pentonville does not answer. It simply continues, holding men in cells designed by Joshua Jebb, enforcing routines that echo 1842, surviving through endurance rather than reform. The prison is a working argument about punishment, architecture, and the state's relationship with suffering, and the argument never ends. The return of solitary's old promise. The separate system died on paper, yet isolation keeps returning whenever institutions want control without scrutiny. The language changes. We do not call it the separate system anymore. We call it administrative segregation, protective custody, restricted housing, solitary confinement. The terms are softer, more clinical, but the practice is the same. Men are locked in cells alone, denied association, deprived of stimulus, and told it is for their own safety or the safety of others. Modern correction still uses isolation as a tool. High-risk prisoners are separated. Gang members are separated. Men who threaten staff are separated. Men who threaten themselves are separated. The reasons are legitimate, but the method is familiar. 23 hours in a cell, minimal human contact. Silence enforced not by hoods, but by policy. The mental health outcomes are the same. Studies from modern prisons show elevated rates of anxiety, depression, hallucination, and self-harm among men held in solitary. The correlation is not subtle. Prolonged isolation damages the mind. We know this. We have known this since Pentonville's medical officers started keeping ledgers in the 1840s. But the practice continues. Why? Because isolation is easy. It requires less staff. It reduces risk. It gives administrators a simple solution to complex problems. A violent prisoner becomes manageable when he is alone. A suicidal prisoner is easier to monitor when he cannot access others. The logic is transactional. It works in the short term. It destroys in the long term. Pentonville's origin logic never died. It simply learned new names. Victorian reformers believed separation would heal souls. Modern corrections believe separation will maintain order. Both assumptions ignore the evidence. Both treat the mind as secondary to the institution's needs. Both create suffering and call it something else. The separate system promised salvation through isolation. Administrative segregation promises safety through isolation. The building is the same. The cell is the same. The silence is the same. Only the justification has changed. History warns us. Pentonville showed what happens when isolation becomes systematic. Men broke. Minds collapsed. Suicides accumulated. The numbers were documented, debated, and ultimately ignored in favor of institutional convenience. We are repeating the pattern. Different century, same mistake. The emotional truth is this: isolation is seductive to institutions. It simplifies management. It removes variables. It turns human beings into units that can be stored, counted, and controlled. But human beings are not units. They are social creatures who need contact, variation, recognition. Deny them long enough, and they break. Pentonville's legacy is not just a building. It is a warning written into architecture. The separate system failed because it ignored human nature. Modern corrections ignores the same lessons. We have not learned. We have simply renamed the harm and continued using it. The same silence, new labels, the same damage, the legacy written into brick. Pentonville proves a cruel truth. You can build a moral theory into architecture, and then the building enforces it for generations. Victorian reformers wanted salvation through isolation. They believed deeply, sincerely, that separation would cure crime by forcing men to confront their sins in silence. They were wrong, but their conviction was strong enough to pour into stone, iron, and mortar. The result is a building that still stands, still operates, still holds men in configurations designed for a discredited philosophy. The prison is not a relic. It is an active participant in modern justice. Men are sentenced there today. They live in cells built in 1842. They walk corridors designed by Joshua Jebb. The architecture shapes their experience as surely as policy does. The building was designed to isolate, and isolation is what it delivers, whether intended or not. This is the deeper legacy. Architecture is not neutral. It carries intention. Pentonville was built to separate, and that logic is embedded in every measurement, every sightline, every cell dimension. You cannot remove that logic without tearing down the building, and Britain will not tear it down because the cost is too high and the need for prison space is too great. So, the prison endures. It survives through adaptation, through compromise, through the state's unwillingness to confront its own past. Pentonville is a Victorian idea wrapped in modern policy, a building that enforces separation through geometry, even when culture has moved on. The broader question is this: what other structures are quietly shaping human behavior in ways we call progress? Schools, hospitals, offices, housing projects. Every building encodes assumptions about how people should move, interact, and live. Some of those assumptions are benign. Some are harmful. Most are invisible until you look for them. Pentonville makes the invisible visible. It is a building designed to break you. It was sold as reform. It was exported as progress. And it worked in the sense that it did exactly what it was designed to do: enforce isolation at scale, damage minds with precision, and survive long enough to be mistaken for normal. The final image is simple: a cell, 13 feet by 7 feet by 9 feet high, the same dimensions as 1842. A man sits on the bed. He is not thinking about Victorian reform theory. He is thinking about time, about how to survive another day in a space designed to deny him everything except his own thoughts. The cell is unchanged. The theory is discredited, But the building remains, doing what it has always done, holding men in spaces built for a moral experiment that failed 150 years ago. That is Pentonville's legacy. Not reform, not redemption, just endurance. The prison proves that architecture can enforce a bad idea long after the idea is dead, and that once you build morality into brick, the brick outlives the morality and continues enforcing something, even if no one remembers why. The walls still stand, the cells still lock, the silence still waits.